Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to people around the world. This is Martin Hubel, your host of the DB2Night show, and here we are into a new year. Happy New Year, everyone. Hope to not see anything like 2020 ever again. I thought it would be a really good year. We would see clearly being 2020 and all when the year started, and all we saw was a clear bunch of stuff that none of us wanted to see. So I hope you're all safe and well. We've got our special guest today with us today is Keri Romanufa of the IBM Toronto Lab. How are you doing, Keri?
Good. How about you guys?
Oh, we're doing pretty well here. We're safe. No one's sick. We live in a house.
Excellent.
We have a wonderful, quiet neighborhood. We can walk around. Dear old Charlie is still with us, although he gets stuck behind furniture. He's now nearly 16. He just walks up and stares at walls. It's kind of sad to see, but he's being the best little guy he can be. And that's about all we can say about that. So let me get the introductions out of the way so you can get on to the main event. Let me just flip through here. Again, here's our social media page. Our hashtag DB2Night is the best thing to follow us on Twitter to know when the shows are going and when replays are available. I try to get that up on Twitter. Replays are now available on YouTube. If you feel like not downloading anything, you can watch the whole show there. As always, here's our disclaimer. We've got the usual things here of things being recorded, trademarks being protected, and everything will be available as replay and copyright 2021 of DBI. And get over here. And so here's what I'm already doing. Here's our upcoming shows. The next DB2 LUW show will be Michael Tiefenbacher, a great consultant from Germany, and he does a fantastic job on a presentation on recursion. If you've ever thought of using recursion, you'll get more ideas if you watch that show. I've seen it, and when Michael said he was willing to present it for us, I said, our audience wants to see that show. It's going to be great.
And anything on recursion is worth seeing over and over and over and over again, and I'll stop that joke now.
Yeah, I wrote my first recursive algorithm in 1975 using Algol, or was that 73? It was some time before they normally kept track of time. Back when we had 2-digit years. That's all I'll say about that. And on the DB2Z side or Z side, we have mitigating migration mayhem in a deprecated world with Roy Boxwell of SEG, Software Engineering Group. He's a great speaker. He's always fun to have on the show. And we have Cheryl Larson returning at the end of February to do Tuning SQL that still works. And it's always great to see Cheryl back. So we're looking forward to that as well. Okay, as always, we have a demo available from our founding sponsor of the DB2Night show, DBI. You can tune DB2 LUW in minutes with confidence if you watch their video on their DBI site. And if you do, you can get yourself a gift card for doing so. Our winner from our last show was Lance Jackson of Pandrew Associates. He gets an Amazon gift certificate. Thanks for watching, Lance, and thanks to everyone else that's won in the past and will win in the future. I just know there will be more. And here are our sponsors of the show, DBI, and yours truly, Martin Hubel Consulting, Inc. And it's kind of funny. I went through a period when COVID first started. I said, how am I going to get work? And all of a sudden, things got real busy. We're doing an I-series conversion to DB2 LUW down in Pennsylvania. And we're also, I'm actually doing some mainframe tuning right now for an insurance company. That's all sorts of fun, going through looking at buffer pool sizes and tuning and stuff like that. And it's rather fun to do. And the only thing on the mainframe is they don't have block-based buffers, so I can't talk about those. That's an ongoing theme, but we're looking at thresholds and sizing and all sorts of data set I/O characteristics. So I'm having fun doing that. And with teaching the odd DB2 LUW DBA class for Themis, I've been a busy boy. And it's interesting to have something to do during COVID. I thought I'd be floating around on a cruise ship, but no such luck. Oops. And here's our joke. This is the same one I used for the Z show last year, but it's so good. I just like to put this stuff up as a public service thing for our LUW audience as well. As days get colder, animals are attracted to the warmth of car engines. Be sure to check your wheel wells and other hiding places so that you don't take off with an animal in your car. So
I thought this was turning into the Price is Right.
well, just about, eh? Anyway, so if you come out and some animals are a little more obvious than others, and it's hypothetically could occur. I think that's actually a European license plate on that car, so that's really not a Canadian thing, but they've picked it up as such. So now we're into our polling thing. Let me bring up the polls. Pop them up, and I'm going to have a first question here. It's going to be just a look at what do you think 2021 is going to be like? And we're getting glass half full answers and glass half full, or glass full and half empty and stuff like that. But let's have a bit of fun. And based on the number of people that have responded, I'll close that and share the result. And what we see is that we've got some really optimistic people, 14%. 43 are probably a little more realistic. I'm kind of in that category. Couldn't be worse than 2020. And then we move on to the other answers there. Let's hide that, and we'll share the next question, which is, what versions of DB2 are you? Oops, sugar. I buggered that up. I clicked the button twice. Can I go back and do that again? Let's see if I can. Maybe not, because it's amazing if I can go back and open that again. I probably can't. So sorry about that. We're not doing the versions of DB2 today, but what we'll do instead, and Martin only clicks it once this time, is how many databases do you currently have? This is both test production, pre-production, acceptance testing, and all of that other types of things that go on. And
I am sure that the person who sent you that question did not put LUW in the title.
I did. I put that in intentionally because I wanted to see what LUW is going on. And because there's all sorts of databases lying around all over companies these days. You look under somebody's desk and you think, oh, there's another database. So I just wanted to see how we're doing with DB2 LUW. And I was wondering whether or not we'd have a number over 1,000, but it turns out we don't. And,
that's interesting. We have tons of, I can't actually see the list of attendees, but I mean, we have tons of customers with over 1,000.
I'm sure you do. And I've been into customers where they have easily, before they even start looking around, there's 100. That's really easy to reach. So, but anyway, no one has under 10. I would suspect that number is easily into the high numbers there. So, moving along, let's close that and see what else we got here. What type of applications are you running? And this is we only give you one answer here because you can sort of see that this gives you a wide range of what you can pick anyway. So some people are doing homegrown, some people are doing a mix, and some people, even the shop I did the most work in was mostly homegrown applications. They still had a little application called SAP running. So,
a small one.
Yeah. Nothing like 73,000 tables to get you out of bed in the morning. So this is kind of an interesting one here. We'll close that off and share the results there. And we see that there's one. It looks like one or two people have only homegrown applications. The but everything else is normally a mix, or they're running package things these days. It depends on how many developers and what business they're in and stuff like that. Most of the governments I work in have to run homegrown applications because of the legislator. The legislators write laws that are unique to their locality, whether that's a city, state, or federal. So we'll close that off, and that'll be the end of our polls for today. And so we'll move on to the main event now. Oops, there's a brief look at one of the DBI screens. And Keri, if you've got a convenient break point, please let me know. And we'll show a 2-minute video from DBI on some features of their products, but we'll get into that as we go along. And here's Keri, and let me get over here, and I'll make you the presenter. You should have a message in the middle of your screen telling you to present. And there you go.
Do you see my screen?
I do.
Do you see my screen in full screen mode?
Just a second. Let me move you over to.
Oops.
I see, and actually, you're on top, so everybody sees your smiling face. And
what about now?
And I see your advanced logs page management, and you're on page 32 of your presentation.
Yeah, that was hit the wrong button. We'll just scroll up through a few.
Part of doing a live show, we get a chance to do everything in a special way, don't we? And you're there, and so take her away. I'm going to mute myself. I'll be watching the Q&A, the questions, and if any come in, I'll let you know. And but in the meantime, I'll be quiet.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get the thing that doesn't wants to cover a piece of my screen as small as possible.
Yes, I've got these control panels. The people are not seeing your control panel, and there's an arrow that'll compress it over to the right if you press the red right arrow up at the top of
okay.
the control panel.
Perfect. That's the button I was looking for.
Great.
Because not that I don't know what's on most of my slides, but just in case.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My plan today is to talk about both 11.5 in general and also 11.5.5, which is the latest release that shipped in end of November. My name is Keri Romanufa. I'm the chief architect for DB2. I've been there, 20, what year is it? It's going to be 29 years in May. So I'll claim to know a little bit about DB2, but to be honest, by far, and I mean, no one knows everything about DB2. So if you have questions, ask. And I'll answer them if I can, and if not, I usually know who would. My contact information is below. You can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, and through email. I've got 2 pages of disclaimers. Basically the summary of this is, especially when I get into the sections talking about futures, none of them has any commitments to ship, any dates or times to ship, and all subject to change. So second page of disclaimers, real quick. So my agenda for today is we have had 3 major mod packs on the 11.5 stream, or really GA plus 2 mod packs. I will look at those, and apparently I have a typo, and it will probably be across all agenda slides. I'll look back at each of those, and I'll take a peek at some of the future 11.5 stream candidates. So let's start with the look back at 11.5. So the one very quick summary slide I'll have is what's up with the numbering. So 10.5, it was not a continuous delivery model. So after we GA'd, we did not have long-term plans to keep developing on that code stream. And we moved to 11.1, which was the first release where we shipped a continuous delivery stream. And what that means is after we GA, we actually plan to have some number, and I'll say an undefined number because we decide that later, as to we will keep shipping function in that stream through what we call mod packs. So with 11.5, much like 11.1, it will follow that continuous delivery model. If the delivery vehicle has new function, we will increase the mod level. But unlike 11.1, we're also going to drop the fixed pack level to 0. If the mod pack has only fixes, we will increase just the fixed pack level. And what this allows us to do is to better show that after a mod pack, if we were to ship a fixed pack, to actually have the numbering increase on that and be able to tell it apart in something like DB2 level. What we had done in 11.1 was this notion of ifixes, and then it wasn't, a dot release, so it was harder to tell them apart. So we have fixed that in 11.5. 11.5 GA highlights. So 11.5 came out in, I got to get this right, the end of June 2019. And we had a number of hills where we focused on. They included cognitive emerging, where we did things such as the ML Optimizer's tech preview. We also tech previewed the ability to go to the Hyperledger blockchain through our federation code. So it's basically a wrapper that lets you to, your queries pull in a Hyperledger. At that point, our hybrid and cloud strategy was Docker containers, so we shipped as a Docker container. Under application development, we did a lot of advances to add new languages, to modernize the levels of the languages which we were supporting, and we also had a beta of something called Augmented Data Explorer. For many people who have seen any of the highlights across the board, one of the huge things we did in 11.5 is we originally, early on in 11.1, had split out the stream that was being used for the DB2 warehouse and the IIS product line. In 11.5, those merged back together. So there was actually a very large number of Columnar enhancements that had been being worked on. So probably the prior, I'll say 2, 3, and even 4 years that were now available in DB2. So some of these enhancements include huge improvements to Columnar insert, update, and delete speed, especially for bulk. Automatic dictionary creation and vectorized dictionary creation, so that is much faster. We added what either we call automatic reorg recompress, or some people hear us call it groom, where when you're initially loading a DB2 table for Columnar, we take some amount of data that goes in uncompressed. Once we have what we consider to be enough data, we then take that data and use it to build a compression dictionary. At that point, any new data will go in compressed based on the dictionary, but you have this older data that went in uncompressed. And with the reorg recompress, it allowed us to take that initial data and actually what we call groom it or recompress it into a compressed format and just free up the space available to that. Really, that did two things. Number one is it allowed us to get that space back, but it also, because we were getting that space back, it allowed us to use more rows in the uncompressed format to create the dictionary. So we went up from, I'll say, about 8,000 to 10,000 into the million range, and even more if you're on DPF, because it'll end up being across nodes. So you also get a much better dictionary being created. We added support for lob as a column type in Columnar tables. And, there's probably 30 things that could be listed under here, but we had, numerous improvements to Columnar query performance. So, in addition to improving your loads and your updates and deletes, also queries went up in, in many cases, order of magnitudes faster. Other focus areas are availability. We tech previewed the advanced log space management, and we added parallel logging when using mirrored logs. So, dramatic speed up to your log flush times under mirrored log situations. There's a large number of PureScale enhancements. So you can see that that's actually, almost half of this page, but improvements to cluster-wide free space management. Host space firewall support, so you can now run PureScale across a firewall, and it will be able to, basically set up some ports to talk for communications. Enhancements to the monitoring of the public Ethernet. Performance improvements where we increase number of ports, the number of XI connections, and the worker limits, so that PureScale clusters can grow even larger. Online index create and online extent reclaim both came in 11.1, but they were both off by default because that's generally our standard for how we do mod packs. They are now enabled by default. So any of the things you saw in the original 11.1 presentations that said do this to turn them on, they're automatically turned on because they're our best practices. Currently committed across PureScale members. So prior to this, if you were doing currently committed, if you needed to go cross-member, it would actually not, on the theory that it could generally be faster to wait for the lock to be released on the other member than it would be to jump across members. And we set up things like loads on RAIN partition tables by orders or by a factor of 2. There are also a large number of enhancements to the core engine. So external table support, and I have a slide on that one. 4K sector support, I'll also talk about that one a bit more in detail. Enhancements to the auto column group stats. So the ability to have our statistics understand the fact that columns have interrelations with them. And, you know, the classic example for that is if you have a car and it's a Corolla, you don't really gain any more information from knowing it's a Toyota. That's kind of a given. So if you kind of try to assume that those two pieces both have some amount of accuracy and start to do multiplication on it to get, you know, result set sizes, we often end up off. So having statistics that says, oh, well, you know, every Corolla is a Toyota and better stats gives you better queries, gives you better performance. We added a bunch of monitoring elements for better monitoring. We added compatibility items such as crate table and drop table if exists. So this matches compatibility with some of our competitors. We added crate table as enhancements, so compatibility with Netezza. We added new application packages that are compatibility for Oracle Compat. We've added SQL-PL enhancements. And for WLM, we added simplified thresholds and cascaded dropping of service classes. So that was the quick look back of 11.5, and now I'm going to deep dive into some of the more specific items. So one of the things we added was support for storage devices using 4K sector size. You need to turn this on to enable it, and what this allows is it allows DB2 to be created on devices that only support 4K IOs. The key thing about this is if you have new devices that either support a 512K emulation mode or, you know, native 4K, chances are you will get better performance on the device if you use it in native 4K. So you can then turn this on and get the best out of your devices. Or if you happen to have a device that only supports 4K, you will want to turn this on. If you're still running on devices that support, you know, 512 and in a performant way, you can continue to use it as is. Next one, Columnar insert, update, and delete performance. So this is a huge one, and the focus very much was on bulk, which is what matches usually what is done in the Columnar environment. So you're bulk loading your data, you're bulk updating and deleting. Number one is it greatly expanded the core parallelism. So our ability to parallelize the operations with the engine, and I stole this from a slide from Chris. You know, he calls it Kiwi, so they kill it with iron. So you need to get something done, get as many cores working as possible. We also spent time on maximizing CPU cache and cache line efficiency. So, you know, some of the things I'll talk about is vectorized processing. And this is where, you know, let's say you're inserting a row, rather than taking that row, splitting it up, going page by page by page across all the columns, you take some chunk of rows, you basically split them up in memory first, get to the point you've got all of column A, and you go insert that into, you know, column A because that's how it's split for Columnar. You repeat for column B, C, and D, and you actually even do similar in the indexes. And that gives you much better, you know, cache efficiency, CPU efficiency, also gives you better efficiency on the instruction pipeline, so you get a lot of better performance and are making best use of the hardware. This is critical to maximize your ETL or your ELT batch performance. That's actually what I should, as a question is, do you call it ETL or ELT? Because I'm an ETL person, and a lot of people say ELT. So many general performance improvements, but like I said, the primary focus was on bulk operations. So on the next page, I show what some of the numbers look like, and I will take this time to pause and drink while people just sort of stare at the chart. But you can see between all the improvements we made and at various points we checked point through the release, we made over 5 times performance improvement in the insert speed. And, you know, even larger if you consider we also had parallelization factors in there. But, you know, we got over to 5 terabytes an hour. And like I said, this is the 10.5 GA data. Your tables remain online. We combined a bunch of features to make this happen. So one of which was ET load. That's available both on-prem and in DB2 Warehouse. The reduced Columnar logging, which is today only available in DB2 Warehouse. Columnar parallel insert, so this lets you parallelize your inserts across as many threads as you want. The vectorized insert, which I mentioned briefly earlier, And also we came up with a very Columnar optimized bulk insert path, which tries to save much more what I'll say the uppercase load utility does in terms of bulk operations, page level operations, minimizing logging, all within the normal insert code path. So as you can see, huge performance improvements. One of the things I mentioned on the previous page was external tables. So the first thing I want to comment is this is not limited to, many of the things in the previous page are limited to Columnar tables. This one is not. It is globally available in DB2 on, I'll say, most of our platforms. And what it is we actually took it from Netezza. And it's a simple mechanism that lets you access external files within an SQL statement, just like it was a table. You can use it to load or unload. You can use it even just for SQL queries if you would like. Keep in mind they are not buffered or cached, so it's not the smartest way to continually do queries, but if you want to just peek at some data and see what it looks like, it's a good way to use it. Currently supports CSV, delimited files, and local and remote sources. You can take a look at our Knowledge Center to see the full syntax is available. But there's really two options how to use it. One of which is you physically create the table, and then you can keep using it even if you're changing the file underneath to contain different data. And here's a simple example. You create the external table, and we're just calling this EXT or external orders. It's got an order number, an order time, and very simple. And we're just saying, use this, and it's an object, and it's basically a file, and here's what the delimiter is, the pipe. And then you can just insert into an existing table where you select start from that. And like I said, you can change that underlying file's contents over time and just keep running that same insert statement, whether it's daily, hourly, weekly, whatever interval you'd like to do that. The next example you can do is you're actually doing that inline, right? So you're not creating it as a permanent table in the catalogs that are permanent. In a way, it's more of a link or a pointer, but you can then basically just do insert into orders, and now you're doing select star from the external tables. Again, it's a file. This time you're saying the source is remote. It's going to come across gzip, so we got to unzip it on the way. And here's the delimiter, which is going to, in this case, be a commenter. So this is for Blue by far the recommended way of how to bring data into your tables. It is fully supported for row. There are still lots of people on the row side who are very, very dependent on things like load, but this is very much our future direction going forward for most cases for loading data into tables. I'm now going to jump to a PureScale item that I talked about a bit on the title slide. Is we support a cross-member currently committed in PureScale. So prior to this, if you were in a PureScale environment, currently committed kicked in saying, oh, look, here's a update of a row. There's a row, it's been updated. I need to go find the previously committed version out of the logs. If it was on the same member, it would work just like it did in single node. If it needed to go off node, we would actually wait for the lock instead of going off node. And the reasoning behind that was generally in OLTP, locks aren't held for that long. So, the goal was to, rather than chasing the lock to whichever member it might be at that point in time, instead just waiting for it to be resolved and passing the data. But there were customers who were doing, say, large batches and stuff, so they wanted to be able to go cross node. So essentially what happens is now if you can't find the waiter on the local node, you will actually go across to the other node, find the lock over there or out of, you'll actually talk to the CF to figure out who has the lock, go to that member, look, get his logs and get the data to pass back that is correct for the currently committed version of the data. Something else we added, and like you said, you'll see that when I did the larger views, there were tons of items added, and these are just a very small subset for each one. Golang for DB2. So, we've been adding new languages. In the latest release, we added Rust. Technically, the language support isn't tied to the DB2 releases, but we generally, pull them in at roughly the same time as we ship a release, so we generally announce them along with that release. This also contains a pointer to where you can go find all the open source drivers. The point I wrote this slide almost a year and a half, 2 years ago, we had 8. We have added to this already, and like I said, a good example is Rust came in the latest release. Okay, I'm doing pretty good on my time check, which is good. So now we're going to take a look back at DB2 11.5.4. And after this step is when I think Martin will come in with his video. So 11.5.4 highlights. So, you know, usually the first question I get with this is, can you guys count? And of course we can. We usually count at 0 because we're C programmers, but after that we're usually pretty good. So how did we jump from basically GA to 4? And we did that because we support both containerized builds and we support, you know, the traditional on-prem installs, which supports all your platforms, including PureScale, Windows, and everything. And we had a .1, 2, and 3 that were only supported for containerized and then available in things like DB2 Warehouse and IIS. Again, we continued with many of the same themes in 11.5.4 that we had in the GA. So, you know, previous slide, I called it a cognitive and emerging, but under the sort of emerging category is the graph database. We had a tech preview for this in 11.5.4. I have a slide later on, so I won't go into details. Our hybrid and multi-cloud, a key thing here is our strategy switch to the DB2 container for Red Hat OpenShift. So I know Peter was here late last year, mid last year, where he did a deep dive on DB2U. So I don't get into that, but it's something that, you know, as, you know, our install path going forward, you know, containerization is a big focus. It's a big way for modernization. It's something I think everybody should look at. And like, there are many presentations on it, both in our webinar series and like I said, the DB2Night show from summer, I believe. Application development, always a focus area. 2 big things I want to mention here, actually probably 3, but DB2 REST APIs. So this is the ability to have access to DB2 through REST APIs. You know, they're basically stateless. You can set them up to, you know, actually drive both SQL type access and even command type access. And another big one is Python UDS. So especially, I mean, it can be used for anything, but a very common use case is for, you know, building ML type operations into DB2 through UDS. Again, like with every release, we update our languages and our drivers. Once again, both Columnar and MPP enhancements. The first one I'll mention is, you know, really a DPF or MPP enhancement, and that is the ability to have DB2 automatically resolve in-doubt resolution or in-doubt transactions. And those can happen in DPF if you are doing, you know, a failover or a crash recovery of a single node, or actually multiple nodes, and it needs to do what we call sideways recovery, and that means to recover, it actually needs to talk across to other nodes, and if those other nodes aren't available, it can't complete that portion, so you end up with these in-doubts. Prior to this, you actually have to run a command to resolve them. Now what happens is DB2 will periodically say, oh, look, somebody new's up. Is that enough for me to be able to resolve it? And it will try. If it is successful, it will tell you that in the diag, and if it's not successful, it also will tell you that just in case there's something you need to do to help out resolve it. Adaptive workload management. You know, there were many enhancements to adaptive workload management itself, including CPU controls, sort threshold, and session priorities. But a big one is that actually we are now supporting the workload. We are supporting adaptive workload management on-prem systems with workload equals analytics. And I've got a slide on this just to talk about, you know, how it's on or off by default and things like that. For columnar tables, we have added page-based bar chart compression, or 2 new types of page-based bar chart compression. We have added the ability to delay the synopsis table population until there are more rows in the table. We are doing that for, you know, basically memory usage, and the biggest one is, you know, if you're inserting one row and we create the base table and the synopsis table columns, there's a lot more space for a single row. So this delays, you know, the usage of the extra space of the synopsis until there's more data available, which is when you'll really get the benefit of the synopsis table. Query performance, again, much like 11.5 GA, tons of enhancements. We're doing, I'll say, better/earlier aggregation, distincts, enhancements to full outer join, residual predicates, null equals null support, so the ability to, push that down. Memory stability. We had our first phase as a compact varchar. We also had many other enhancements to, either reduce or better predict memory usage, so we have better memory stability and less likely you'll see 955. We added what I'll call a logical truncate, where you get rollback support, and that's done by essentially, truncate is really a delete, and that is very fast in Columnar because you're really just flipping a single bit and not doing physical deletes. So it gives you an option in Columnar, and this is really done as a compatibility item because some other databases only support the logical style that can be rolled back. We added a RID scaler function, so you can actually take what, that TSN or the RID that's passed back and figure out which row it really maps to. And this is something you could do with the RID for a long time on row, and you can now do for Columnar to figure out, say, which row is affecting your locking issues. Alter table, add column for lobs. So I talked about 11.5 GA. We added the ability to create tables with lobs. This was kind of the next phase of that, where you could actually take an existing blue table and add a lob through the alter command. More 11.5.4 highlights. Availability. So this is where we added the automated HADR with pacemaker tech preview. Advanced log space management went from tech preview to GA. We added the ability to block rear-pending operations through a registry variable. We added new monitoring columns specifically for HADR. Under the core engine, optimizer version control, faster database activation, both of those I have slides for a bit more detailed deep dive. Under compatibility, we had skip lock for data for queries, so this allows you to skip through locked rows and not return them. So if you're waiting on to see if a delete's being committed or not. Nested with support, alias support in the where clause, faster indexing splitting. So this one, if you're really high contention on an index, we're actually going to split them faster, which means less time holding latches, which means you get better performance under high concurrency, and more Oracle compatibility items where we added new packages. An area with a lot of focus for 11.5.4 was security. So we made sort of some first steps in single system sign-on with JWT tokens. And what we do is with JWT tokens, they are passed throughout DB2 and checked throughout DB2. But they can come in from Watson, get passed through Federation to Big SQL. So it's basically, like I said, single system sign-on across that DB2 landscape. We added support for authentication caching. I got slides on this. We shipped our Red Hat 7 and 8 documents on SE Linux support. So if you're running RHEL 7 and 8, you can check out those about how to set up SE Linux. And we also allowed the SSL server label to be changed online. And that one we actually, I believe, backfit to the 11.1 stream. So that one you can also find there. Also under cognitive and emerging, we had tech preview 2 of the ML optimizer. We took many of the in-database analytics functions that had been available in DB2 Warehouse for some number of years and made them available on DB2 on-prem. We have always had spatial extenders, I won't say always, for a long time, and I can't even remember when they came in. We've had spatial extenders. We added support for spatial analytics, which is basically, I'll say, Gen 2. They're much more built into DB2. You'll find that a lot of their data is being pushed into the catalogs as we progress in DB2, and you'll see that coming in the future. And the other big one is they support both Columnar and row, where extenders support only row tables. Federation, parallelism was added, so you can see orders of magnitude speed up in some of the queries. And I'm going to say numerous, and I think there was at least 10 plus new JDBC or ODBC connectors to get out to you know, a lot of the new databases that are coming in the DB2 landscape, or in the basically database landscape. So that was the quick summary of many things that are 11.5.4. I will now go into a deep dive of, you know, a small handful of those many topics. So the first one I'll talk about is authentication cache, and you know, this is under the security item. And I'm actually going to skip through this slide and go to the picture slide. But essentially what happens is when you come into DB2, we need to authenticate you as a user. And often what that requires is, that requires us to call out to some external thing. One example is an LDAP server. And just to be clear, that server may not be local. It may actually need to go across the network. It may go to some other place. And that server is not just being used by us. It could be used by many other things, and it may be overloaded, and either due to network or due to the server itself, you know, the latency to go do that could be noticeable compared to maybe what is a short connection, run a couple operations, and then basically end that connection or terminate that connection. So what we added to do was the ability of having a cache. So what that means is, the majority of the time, if you have a user coming in, we're going to look up in the cache and find that that user's already there and avoid the trip to the LDAP server. And, you know, even if the server is fast, we're still going to be avoiding that call and going out. If that server is slow and bottlenecked, first of all, we're minimizing how much contention we're adding to it. But we're also avoiding picking up the latency of whatever time it takes it to respond. So, you know, if you're running short connections and you find that, you know, your authentication server is being bottlenecked, this is a great way to help reduce that. And at the same time, we're still very security conscious. So this is controlled by two configuration parameters. The first thing I'll say is it's off by default. So, you know, the default behavior is still to go out every single time and ask. You turn it on by saying how many users you want to cache for. So, you know, that depends on how many users you have. Maybe you have 5 or maybe you have 1,000. And also, probably most important is you set a duration. So this says how frequently do we go and recheck. So if something was to change where, you know, people's abilities change, how long would it take us to notice that? So we picked the default to 3 minutes. You can adjust that. And the other thing is there's also the ability to flush it, which basically says right after you call the flush command, we will force everybody, so you clear the cache, you're not going to find anything in the cache, and everything else needs to go and recheck. So if for some reason you thought there was some sort of incident and you want to make sure everybody goes back out ASAP, both SecAtom and DB2Atom have the ability to clear the cache and drive that. Yeah, there's also enhancements to the monitor just to show, you know, are you getting cache efficiency, or maybe you set it to 5 thinking you only had 5 unique users and you really have 10. So, you know, for just a little bit more memory, you could be much more efficient. The next one I'll talk about is optimizer version control. So with optimizer version control, the goal is to allow, you know, you as a DBA or your DBAs to quickly revert the optimizer behavior in terms of query rewrite and transformations and access plan generations to match previous versions and releases. This is a single control that is meant to back off all of the changes that might be on by default between different, you know, both releases and mod packs. The use case I expect most people to do it is if they move up and they find they see something they don't want and they just want, you know, a very quick way to revert back. This could also be used proactively, but I don't recommend it running with long-term, because especially between GA releases, you know, we put in many, many improvements that are good. And if you were to leave this on, you're pretty well losing all of those. So not recommended long-term, and very much just to be to drop back in quickly. And prior to this, you know, what would happen is, you know, you would see maybe a query that degraded, you would call support. They would recommend, based on the query and data collection, either documented or undocumented registry variables to try to revert the behavior. So this is just the very quick way and a sort of user-controlled way. This is supported through a new registry variable, DB2 optimizer version. The default is always equal to the current version. So by default, we want you running with what is the latest and greatest, but it can be set to any 4-part release name since 10.5.0.0. So if you were to set it to 11.5.0.0 in 11.5.4, it means you are running with all the optimizations that were allowed and no other ones that were allowed in 11.5 GA. I want to add that this does not prevent plan changes, because if your statistics changes or if there are other non-optimizer code changes, it can still pick a different plan. And the other thing is this is applied first, followed by any other SQL registry variable. So this is kind of the super setting, and then when you set other things on top of it, it will override those, so you don't lose the ability to control those. Next one I want to mention really briefly, faster database startup. So most of the things I've talked about is off by default. This one is on by default because really there is zero downsides, it's all upsides. Speeds for your database startup have gone up to, it was about 120 times on Linux if you're running about 300 gig of buffer pool. It can be even higher if you have more and larger buffer pools and lock lists. And the benefit on AIX is not quite what it is on Linux, but I'll say 43 times faster is still pretty good. So like I said, this is on by default. And, especially in recovery cases and all that, or, you're bringing your database down to do some maintenance, you'll see this. The next one I'll talk about is Columnar compression improvements. So I mentioned this briefly where if you are running varchars, there are huge improvements to what you're going to see for compression. And we did this by adding 2 new page level compression methods. And by page level, I mean they aren't stored in the dictionary. For each page that we're filling, we look at the data that would be put on that page and compress it and see if they're going to help. And if they do, well, then we just throw even more data on the page. The first is what we call a repeating pattern-based compression, or LZ4-based. This works really well for geospatial data, URLs, comment fields, anything within a page where you get the same patterns repeating. And within a page, it can really mean 2 things. You either have 1,000 columns on that page that are all /http ... or you have a comment field that is talking about dates or times or anything where there's a lot of repeating patterns that are stored in your string data. And typically we see 2 to 4 times compression, but obviously this is very dependent on frequency and length of pattern. So the more frequent the repeats are and the longer they are, the better compression you will get. The next one we support is something called nibble-based compression. And when this kicks in, and it's not guaranteed to kick in, you're basically guaranteed to get 2 times compression. And when this kicks in is anytime you have 16 or less unique characters on a page in that string or character data. And this works well for things like phone numbers, coordinates, dollars amounts, where you're really looking at 10 numeric digits, and then on top of that, maybe you have a $sign or brackets or commas or a minus or a dot. And so that gives you 6 characters in addition to those numbers. And like I said, when this kicks in, you get 2 times compression. This is stored compressed both in the disk and the buffer pool. So you not only get the on-disk savings, you get the savings in memory. A big thing I want to mention is for on-prem, these are off by default, and they require a registry variable to enable. And once set, we will start using these compression methods for any new data that's being created. The reason they are off by default is because for on-prem, we generally support you taking fixed fact X and reverting to X minus 1. And if these were on by default, when you reverted, you would not be able to read that new data. So these are off by default. But I strongly recommend that you turn these on by default, move up, make sure you have a backup at the new level, and eventually get to the point you're turning these on by default. Because like I said, you will see huge improvements if you are a Columnar customer who uses varchars. For example, of what some of the performance improvements look like, you know, big disclaimer, these are lab results. So, you know, what's that? Past performance, I feel like I'm selling mutual funds, is no guarantee of future performance. And what you'll see here is an 11.1. You know, we had some tables with varchar data, and this is not varchar only. You know, it was about, what's that, 15% better, 20% better in 11.5 GA, and it was about half of the size once we got to 11.5.4 with the reduction of the columnar data. And, you know, one of the reasons you see this is because the things that are not compressed as well end up taking up a large portion of the data. So once they compress really well, you'll see huge benefits. I have another example on the right-hand side where, you know, this was some financial data. So they happen to have a lot of numbers and types of things that were actually in string data. And you'll see that in this case, what's that, less than a third of the size. So again, huge improvement. So, you know, strongly recommended, even though it's off by default. Just be at a point where you know you don't want to drop back up to the previous fix back.
Keri?
Yep.
I've got a question here for you from Chuck. He asks, can lobs be compressed?
Currently, no.
Okay, thanks. That's a short answer. And when you got a moment, let me give my commercial in, if you don't mind.
I think I have 2 more slides, and then I'm done the 11.5.4 section, and then it's your turn.
Perfect, thanks.
Or maybe 4 more slides. I can't remember which ones I removed. I started with 97 at 11 o'clock last night and tried to get it down to 60 for an hour. So
woohoo!
Okay. And we'll still see how I do on time.
Right.
Adaptive WLM, I mentioned it. It is now supported if you're running workload equals analytics on 11.5.4. There will be a future stage 2 where it will be available to all DB2 customers. It requires an opt-in procedure, so again, not on by default. My last 2 slides, I think, for 11.5.4 is advanced log space management. I talked about it earlier, but it's actually GA'd in 11.5.4. The whole concept behind active log space management is one of the issues that customers sometimes had with log management was they would have a long-running transaction that did a little bit of work or just a tiny bit of logging, but it ran for a very long time, and because the other workload is filling up logs, they could hit log full situations. So what active or advanced log space management does is it would take what used to be a few log records in this log file, or it can even be spread across most of them, and it will pull them into the transaction extraction log file, and it's done by transaction, and pull those out so that these 3 files are no longer part of the active log, because any of the information needed to be able to roll back that, or in crash recovery to roll back that, are now in these separate transaction log files. And there's 2 advantages. One is, you know, if you need to do rollbacks, you'll find that that transaction is, you know, co-located together itself on disk. And it also, like I said, it allows the available logs to move up. So this is now the active log, and you can have 3 other logs created after this. And the last one, I hope before I give Martin his turn, otherwise he'll never invite me again, is DB2 Graph. We came out with the tech preview of that. The key point to understand here is, one is it's based on Gremlin, so it's the Gremlin language that you will write those graph queries in. And like I said, the key point is the data stays in DB2 and, you know, in the regular formats you have today. And what it does is it's almost essentially a translation layer that takes those Gremlin queries, converts them into SQL, and runs them against your data, which means you can get the real-time graph access without spending the effort to take your DB2 data, export it, load it into a graph, now have it stale because it took you, you know, 4 hours to do that. And instead you can run it live against your actual real running data. The other thing I'll mention is there's actually built-in feature that will take your RI and use that to build the edges and the vertices. So, you know, if you have RI defined, you're in many ways are saying, I have relationships, and we'll take a look at that and go, so this is what we think are your edge and vertices that come out of it. And now I'm going to say it's Martin's turn.
All right, let me just get over here and see if I can, oh, I need to make myself a presenter first. A second here. It'll just take a moment, and then we go in here, and there. Should be starting momentarily. There we are. Shan't run too long. Again?
We're switching back to show my screen.
Yep, we see it just fine. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So now I'm going to actually take a look back at 11.5.5, which, as I said, shipped in, I'm going to say the 24th of November, but essentially the end of November. Again, very similar hills and areas. Cognitive and emerging, we did another drop of the Optimizer Tech Preview. Both we changed a lot of infrastructure, which you may not necessarily notice, but we supported even more queries. We've continued with the Red Hat OpenShift container and a lot of updates there. Application development, we updated the Visual Studio Code IDE. Even more drops and more parallelism for federation, and we also enhanced some of the clients. I talked earlier about reorg recompress and what it did, and that's basically they're grooming the data that initially went in uncompressed. We made large advancements in the performance and the concurrency improvements, so it takes much less time to do that data and groom it, and you also get much better concurrency of other things running with it. And the other thing is, for that data that's groomed, those new bar chart compression. So when I talked about the frequency compression and the nibble compression, that will now, as of 11.5.5, be applied on that initial data that went in and is groomed later. If you are a DB2 Warehouse or IaaS customer, we have the schema or the logical backup, and we added new function and support to that as it's progressing. And a very large one was, once again, query performance and memory reduction, with focusing for group bys and hash joins when you're using varchars. Other enhancements is the Coral pacemaker and Coral Sync becoming supported for HADR as a replacement for TSA and RSCT. Advanced log space management, it did its next stage, and that was adding support for mirrored logs. One of the things I didn't mention was 11.5.4 is essentially, when everybody, it was in our development and under test when all the first set of COVID restrictions came in. And because of that, we were essentially allowed 0 people in the lab, which meant we couldn't do some of our PureScale testing. So 11.5.4 does not support PureScale. Make sure you jump up to 11.5.5. And with the return of that, there were new enhancements for PureScale. Core engine, I talked about spatial analytics. We focused on improving the performance of it in some use cases, and also adding shape info to the DB2 SD. Schema level authorization. People have heard probably me talk about this many times and how it was supported in DB2 Warehouse. We added support for all platforms. Now it's supported on-prem, and DB2 audit support was added. We added DB2 Hismon. That actually came out in 11.5.4, and we added new monitor style report functions. People looking how to monitor their database and to be able to see some trends, I actually recommend you look into this. There's some good documentation. And under JWT, we did some follow-ons where we supported multiple labels in the configs, and also made DB2 PD enhancements to be able to see some of the stuff that was going on. Sorry, having some, that was the quick summary 11.5.5. So let me talk about a deep dive similar as I did to some of the other items. One of the biggest ones I talked about was the performance of queries with varchars and memory reduction in memory. We called this compact varchar phase 2. Phase 1 I believe was in I can't remember if it was GA or 5.4, and there's going to be upcoming phases as we go. But what we did here is we improved memory efficiency if you're using varchars that are defined as wide but are really not wide in any columnar, group by, and join queries. This both reduces memory, reduces I/O spilling, and also reduces out of memories. In addition to that, there are also performance improvements of it, and in some cases, let's say we reduce memory by 10 times, we might actually just reduce memory usage of that query by 5 times and take that as some performance improvements by increasing concurrency. So overall results, we had queries that now performed, for overload workloads almost 3 times faster, and individual queries, over 17 times faster. Memory reduction, it's 1.1 times less memory to 2.5 for individual queries. And like I said, a lot of the memory reduction, what we actually did was turn it into the performance issues, the performance enhancements you see above. And a huge one was spilling reduction. So, if you ended up essentially with temps, or sorts or anything like that, it could be, 5 to 6 times smaller for over workloads, and in some cases, for individual queries, we had some queries that were over 1,200 times smaller. And there are also cases where queries that didn't have enough memory to run were actually now running successfully. So huge benefits for your varchar queries in columnar data. I mentioned this one earlier, schema level security. So prior to this, we supported your ability to set object level or database level. And with schema level, you now have the ability to set it at a schema level and control your access. So this just makes it easier when you have a bunch of things in a schema that you want similar access being granted. The next one I'll mention is, pacemaker and Coral Sync. This was tech preview in 11.5.4. And as of 11.5.5, it is supported for 2-node automated HADR failover with Linux. And technically, it should probably say multiple nodes, because as of 11.5.5, it also supports multiple standby support. We added the ability to support fast redeployment with imports and exports for how you set up your configuration. And we also have a mode that, rather than what I would say is traditional DB2 failover, we take advantage of the failover and fencing that's in AWS and tie it directly into how AWS does its fencing. And there are both pros and cons with that method. So if you're interested in this, I know that Alan did a probably 1 hour iDoug for anybody who's an iDoug member, and he did a 30-minute webinar for deep dive, and like I'll have a couple more slides, but nowhere as deep as Alan went into. You know, this is our future for how we plan to do our HA. Next steps, we're going to take Pacemaker and CoralSync, which right now you have to go and grab separately, but grab versions that we recommend and provide. We're going to add integrated bundling install. We're going to add support on power platforms for both AIX and PPCLE. TSA is not only used for automation of HADR, but some customers use it for active passive style failover, so you kind of have node A fails to node B. And they also do that for DPF where HADR is not supported. Those configs will be added later. Also things like mount point monitoring. We're coming out with more white papers on various clouds as we run and validate them, and often are working with the vendors, and potentially adding support for majority quorum. Let me just flip through all of the graphics of this. So the question is, why Pacemaker and CoralSync, and what version is supported? So Pacemaker and so DB2 has never said, you know, you are not allowed to run a other non-integrated solution, but it meant we did not support the solution, and we only supported the DB2 side of the house. So you can still choose to run the non-integrated solution, but then it is not supported by DB2 and IBM. If you grab Pacemaker and CoralSync, you know, either going forward bundled from us or from, you know, our versions that we send pointers and links to and say this is how you install, then it's an integrated solution, and DB2 will provide the support for it. It's open source, which means, you know, if we need to make changes or enhancements, we can do that. Much simpler for you, right? You know, there's basically one vendor to go work with. We own the end-to-end solution. You know, it will be fully integrated, and we can control the software levels and make sure you are using a version of Pacemaker that is tested with the version of DB2. So the recommended version going forward is, even if you were choosing to run Pacemaker in the past, that you know, move to the DB2 integrated solution, and people setting up new should automatically set up the integrated. I'm going to skip this slide. It's mostly for reference. It's as of today, what platforms and releases are supported and what will be coming in the future. The key is, if you're running on cloud, you know, you really want to get to Pacemaker and CoralSync ASAP for support. If you're running on-prem, it is still good to get there, but it is not as important. The next one in 11.5 was something we called Concurrent Online Fixpack and Modpack Update. Prior to 11.5, if you wanted to upgrade a PureScale cluster, you essentially would do host by host by host. The first improvement is we made the update of each individual host a third faster, so it takes, you know, a third less time. The other enhancement we made is better support for parallelism. So rather than doing host by host by host, you can do it in subsets. But the key is you need to keep enough hosts up for quorum. So, you know, this can actually reduce, not only is each one faster, but now if you have a large cluster, you can do, you know, half a third of your cluster in parallel. So much faster to get your whole system up to the latest level. And the other one is, we, after pretty well every step of DB2 cluster, we're revalidating the cluster topology to make sure it was valid. And this meant if you did, you know, the type of steps, okay, that's actually just showing all the operations. But if you were doing something that required, you know, 10 DB2 cluster commands to complete your maintenance, you would be running that 10 times. And the bigger your cluster is, the longer that takes. So what we added is the ability to run it separately. So many of our maintenance steps, you have now pulled out from running it multiple times to just running it at the end. And so this allows those operations to be faster. But the other thing about us pulling it out into its own tooling is we now are actually going to run it with the engine automatically once every 24 hours. And this is essentially a sanity check to make sure that for some reason your cluster is still valid. If there's any issues, we're going to raise alerts and also write things to the diag.log. And now you know that there's a problem and you can go fix it and be automatically warned about it. So I've got about 5-ish minutes. I'm going to take a peek at some of the future 11.5.x candidates. This is the section where really all those disclaimers I talked about earlier are important for. Anything here, it's not saying which 11.5 it will come in, nor is it really saying that it will, any promise or guarantee will actually ever come, or even in the form I'm talking about. So I'll call this cool things we're working on sections. So one of the things is I talked early on about all the performance enhancements we did for bulk insert. One of the things we're looking at now is speeding up what we call trickle insert, or small numbers of inserts. So what we do here is inside of blue tables, we traditionally split columns so that generally there is one column for what we call a column group. So here you see your rows going in, and columns are blue, yellow, and pink. And when you do bulk insert, you end up with rows of, or pages of blue and pages of yellow and pages of pink. Under the covers, those actually sometimes, especially if you have things like nulls, really have multiple columns in them. So we have always supported the ability to put multiple columns together, but other than things like nulls and a few of our internal columns, we split user data out into, basically, like you said, column 1, column 2, column 3. What we do with these new trickle insert is we still put the data in in columnar format, but rather than splitting, if you have 1,000 columns, we will not split it out to 1,000 to start. Maybe it's 10, maybe it's 5. A lot of that's going to depend on the number of columns you have and the length of those columns. But we split it out to much, much less pages. So therefore, the overhead is less to originally just drop that data in quickly. And then as those pages that kind of have partial rows start to fill up and start to fill extents, it will automatically trigger splitting them and doing the bulk insert code path to get them fully split out. So you essentially end up with a 2-phase insert for your small trickles. The first page is a very fast, we're going to split them up a little bit, but not totally, followed by using that very fast bulk insert that I talked about earlier to split them out fully. All of this happens, I'll say automatically. It happens in the background. You're not controlling it. We decide how many groups to split into, and that is automatically done. So this is again automatic. And the one thing I want to mention, once again, when this shifts, this will be off by default for the same reason as a lot of the compression stuff comes off by default. It starts writing things in new ways and new formats, which the old versions, fix packs and mod packs can't understand. Therefore, you need to turn them on to say, you now want this and you understand you cannot have fallback support. Other candidates in Columnar, system maintain temporal tables. So this is something that has been supported for row for a long time. I've talked about the new compression features and the new compression algorithms. It is supported by Groom, but we do not yet have the ability to say, I have terabytes of data on disk already, I want to recompress those. Future support will allow us to go back and recompress those for any page level compression features. Essentially potentially freeing up a lot of space. And a big thing I want to mention on this is it's column-based. So if we know that the only thing that can gain advantage of this at this point is, say, varchars, those are the only columns we will recompress. And much like everything else in blue, again, this is going to be automatic. We're going to look for those varchar columns. We're going to look for the ones that we think that benefit. Those are the ones that we'll do automatically. real-time statistic collection, and I've talked about compact varchar and the many things we've done for query performance and memory stability. Continuing on that. Another thing that's coming, and this will initially be shipping in DB2 Warehouse and probably is a tech preview, is the ability for a multi-tenancy support. And this is the ability to isolate tenants or users apart from each other so they see different namespaces of the world. I'm going to skip these just in the amount of time I have because I've got, according to my watch, 1.5 minutes. So I'm going to skip the deep dive on this and go to a couple more of the broad topics. ALSM support, I've talked about coming. I've talked about the mirrored logs, which 11.5.5. There's more support coming in future drops for support for HADR and also putting the instruction logs in online backup and restore and use them for restore and roll forward as opposed to necessarily just putting the full logs in. Availability candidates, I already talked about this one in the next steps in Pacemaker. Another enhancement we're doing is if you're on hardware with NX842 support, we will have a library that supports both compression and encryption at the same time. In 11.5.5, we shipped Red Hat 8 support for PureScale, but it is supported only for sockets. One of the things we're working on is changing our infrastructure of how we use RDMA so that we get support of RDMA on RHEL 8, and so that is something we're working on. Other PureScale candidates, Z-Linux support. Our plan is to be GAing that. Ability to do some is adapter liveliness support, so understand what's available and failures, and like I said, the Red Hat support. SQL and utility enhancements. There's going to be improvements for set integrity. So if you're doing any constraints or RI and you need to do set integrity checking, then we're going to speed that up. Lifting some SQL limits for columns per table and even total column lengths and group by and order by. And my final one is, again, more on the spatial analytics roadmap where things like GeoJSON, KML, box filters to, that's kind of like an index to make your queries improve a lot faster, and spatial aggregation. And I believe I'm done. And final page of DB2 resources, tons of them. If there's anything that some of the details of, especially the previous releases, like I said, I went from a 97-page deck down to about 59, and apparently I should have made it about 56. But there's lots of things that are recorded if you want details on any of the other topics. So thank you everyone for showing up. I hope everybody learned something, and thank you everyone for being. I'm guessing most of you are DB2 customers, so thank you. And
great.
I saw mixed feelings of optimism for COVID, and we'll see how this year goes. And my answer is wear a mask. We're all in this together.
That's basically what we do in Canada. That's for sure. All right, just our final question to wrap up that we like to ask people, which is, did you learn anything today? And I'd like to have people answer this, and people are answering quickly because it's into our lunch hour here in the Eastern time zone. And the answer is 100% of our audience learned something today, Keri. That's what we like to see, and life is good. Yeah,
that might simply be the two of us have a bad sense of humor, but I'm hoping they learned something about DB2.
I'm pretty sure they did. It was a lot of information as always. Thank you for your slide deck. I already have it, so I'll be putting that up on the replay blog today. People can download the deck as well as a copy of the recording that we've made for the presentation. So with that, I'll wish everyone a good weekend. I believe it's a long weekend in the States, so with Martin Luther King Day on Monday. Enjoy, and we will see you back in 2 weeks for the next DB2Z show with Roy Boxwell. And enjoy. Take care. Bye-bye. Let me get that.
Thanks again, everyone. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye. Thanks. See ya.